The cards were already on the table when Clara understood what her husband had done. She had not heard the specific terms of the bet. She had only watched Ethan's face across the smoky room, the way his jaw set, the way his eyes refused to find hers, and the understanding had arrived in her body before it reached her mind. A cold, spreading stillness, moving upward from her hands. Then Victor Kane rose from his chair, and the way he looked at her, the way a man looks at something he has just purchased, confirmed everything. She looked at her husband. He could not look at her. That was the moment. Not the words. Not the room shifting around her. The moment was her husband's downcast eyes. The eyes of a man who already knew what he had done and could not bear to face it. This is the story of what came after. And it begins, as most stories of ruin do, not with a monster, but with a good man making a terrible choice. Ethan Carter was not rich. He was not famous. He was not the fastest gun in the territory, but he was honest. And in Black Creek, Wyoming, that was rarer than gold. Every morning before the sun crested the mountains, he saddled his horse and rode out to work. Every evening he returned covered in dust and sweat, grateful for another day's wage. He never complained, never asked for more than he earned. In a town full of men reaching for things that didn't belong to them, Ethan Carter simply worked. What he never realized was that a young woman named Clara Bennett had been watching him for years. She had noticed him first at the general store, 3 years before they ever spoke. He had given up his place in line for an old widow struggling with a heavy parcel. It was a small thing. He probably forgot it before he reached the door, but Clara had stood by the window and watched him tip his hat to the woman, and something in her chest had shifted. Quiet and certain, the way a compass needle finds north. She admired his kindness, his honesty, the way he helped others before helping himself. She had grown up watching men chase money and glory while the people around them went hungry. Ethan was different. He wasn't chasing anything. He was simply living. And somehow, that was more attractive than anything she had ever seen. When fate finally brought them together, Clara felt as though every prayer she had ever whispered had been answered. Within a year, they were married. At first, life was beautiful. They lived in a small ranch house on the edge of town. They laughed together, shared simple meals, and dreamed aloud about their future. In the evenings, Ethan would sit on the porch with his boots off, and Clara would bring 2 cups of coffee, and they would watch the sky turn colors over the mountains. And neither of them would say anything, because there was nothing that needed saying. For the first time in his life, Ethan understood what it meant to truly love someone. Not the wanting kind of love, the kind that made him want to be worthy of her. He worked harder than ever. Every dollar he earned was for Clara. But slowly, something shifted. Clara had grown up poor. The kind of poor that leaves marks on a person, marks they spend the rest of their life trying to cover. She had worn mended dresses to church. She had watched other women arrive in carriages while she walked. She had smiled at all of it and said nothing, but she had felt it every single time. Marriage to Ethan was supposed to be the beginning of something better, and it was. But better was a road that kept moving further ahead no matter how fast she walked toward it. First it was a nicer dress, then jewelry, then furniture from the East, then a larger house, then finer horses. The wanting grew faster than Ethan could earn, and Clara told herself she deserved it, that all those years of going without had entitled her to something. She told herself Ethan could manage it if he only tried harder. She never once asked herself what the wanting was really about. Ethan never argued. He simply worked longer hours, but even 16-hour days couldn't keep pace with her growing expectations, and the gap between what she wanted and what they had began to feel, to Clara, like a failure, his failure, though some quiet part of her, a part she refused to listen to, knew that wasn't entirely fair. One night, desperate to earn more money, Ethan stepped into the Silver Ace Saloon. The sound of piano music echoed through the smoky room. Men crowded around gambling tables. Cards flipped. Coins changed hands. Fortunes disappeared. Ethan had always avoided places like this. But desperation changes a man's geography. He only meant to watch. Then he sat down, just one game. That single decision changed everything. To his surprise, he won. The next night he won again and again. Within months, Ethan was earning more at the tables than he had ever earned from ranch work. And, for the first time since their wedding, Clara seemed satisfied. She smiled more, complained less, praised his success in a way that made him feel, briefly, like the man he had always wanted to be for her. He should have recognized the danger in that feeling. A man who gambles to earn his wife's approval has already lost something more important than money. Then came the night that destroyed his life. Across the poker table sat Victor Kane, the most feared gambler in the territory. The game lasted until dawn. The stakes grew larger with every hand, fed by pride and desperation in equal measure. Ethan wagered his savings, lost his horses, lost his ranch, lost every possession he owned, lost. By sunrise, he had nothing. Victor smiled coldly across the table. "Looks like you're finished, Carter." Ethan stared at the cards, at the empty space where his life had been an hour ago. His hands were flat on the table. He couldn't feel them. Then Victor leaned forward, and his eyes drifted, slowly, deliberately, toward where Clara stood near the wall. The room fell silent. Every instinct Ethan had screamed at him to stand up, to take his wife's hand and walk out into the cold Wyoming air and never look back. He knew, in that moment, exactly what kind of man he was about to become. He knew it the way a man knows he is about to step off a ledge. The knowledge arrives a half-second too late. He accepted the wager. The cards were dealt. Minutes later, it was over, and now we return to where we began. Clara standing in the silver ace. The room gone quiet. Victor Kane rising from his chair, and her husband, the man who had once given up his place in line for a stranger, the man who had brought her coffee on the porch and watched the sky turn colors without needing to say a word, unable to meet her eyes. "You belong to me now," Victor said. As he led her toward the door, she looked back at Ethan one final time. Tears ran down both their faces. Before she disappeared into the darkness, she heard him speak, not to the room, not to Victor, but to her. Only to her. "I swear to you, Clara, I'll come back." She held those words for a long time afterward, long after she stopped believing them. Days later, Victor traveled west with Clara. Along the journey, they crossed paths with a wealthy businessman named Samuel Graves, who owned hotels and trading posts across several frontier towns. Samuel noticed Clara immediately, not because of her beauty, but because of the particular quality of her stillness. He had seen it before, in people who had survived something they hadn't yet found words for. After a brief negotiation, Samuel purchased her contract from Victor. He was not a cruel man. Clara was given work, cooking, cleaning, helping manage guests, and in the hierarchy of situations she might have found herself in, she understood that this was among the more survivable ones. She was grateful for that, and she hated herself a little for being grateful. In the first weeks, Samuel asked her nothing personal. He was a businessman, practical, measured, not unkind. But one evening, when the establishment was quiet and Clara sat alone in the kitchen long after her work was done, he found her there and simply set a cup of tea on the table beside her. She told him everything that night: the marriage, the gambling, the moment by the door, the promise she had heard through the darkness as Victor led her away. She told him because she had been carrying it alone for weeks, and the weight had become unbearable. And Samuel Graves had the particular quality of a man who could receive a hard story without flinching or looking away. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "If your husband ever comes looking, and I believe he will, I want you to know that you will have a choice. That is not something I can guarantee you everywhere in this territory. But here, in this establishment, it is something I can guarantee you." Clara nodded. She did not yet believe Ethan would come, but she filed Samuel's words away carefully. In the same place she kept everything she was not ready to think about yet. The first year she waited for Ethan, she told herself stories about what had happened. that he had been delayed, that the territory was dangerous, that he was coming, that the man who once brought her coffee on the porch and watched the sky turn colors was riding toward her even now, and that soon she would hear his voice at the door. She kept her wedding ring in a small cloth pouch against her skin. Every night she took it out and held it, not because she was sentimental, because she needed something to hold on to. The second year, she still waited, but differently. The way you wait when you have started to suspect the thing you are waiting for will never come. She learned the rhythms of Samuel's establishment. She learned which guests were kind and which ones weren't. She learned how to make herself invisible in a room and how to be present without being there, and all the small survivals that women in her position had been teaching each other for centuries. She thought about Ethan less. She thought about herself more, not the self that had wanted fine dresses and imported furniture, but an older, quieter self she was only now getting acquainted with. The girl who had watched a stranger give up his place in line for an old woman and felt something shift in her chest. That girl had known something, had recognized something real. Clara was starting to understand that what she had recognized in Ethan had nothing to do with what he could provide. The third year, she stopped taking the ring out at night. She didn't throw it away. She just stopped performing the ritual. Ethan had made a promise outside the Silver Ace and had not kept it, and whatever the reasons were, and she tried, sometimes, to imagine the reasons, the fact remained that 3 years had passed, and she was still here and he was nowhere. By the fourth year, Clara had made a kind of peace with her life that was not happiness, but was not despair either. It was endurance with dignity, the same endurance she had practiced all her childhood, wearing mended dresses to church while other women arrived in carriages. She knew how to carry a hard thing without letting it hollow her out. She had always known. It was in the fourth year that a traveler named Daniel Reed passed through town and took a room at Samuel's establishment. Clara had known Daniel years before. They had grown up in the same town, moved in the same circles. He had been quiet and steady, the kind of man who noticed things other people overlooked. She had liked him the way you like someone whose goodness is obvious without being performed. She had never thought of him romantically. She had been too busy watching a ranch hand give up his place in line at a general store. What Clara did not know, what she had never known, was that Daniel had loved her long before she married Ethan. He had buried those feelings the day she accepted another man's proposal. He had left Black Creek quietly, without bitterness, and had spent years making a life elsewhere. He had never told her. He had never told anyone. Some feelings, he had decided, were not meant to be said aloud. They were simply meant to be carried. He had not come to Samuel's establishment looking for her. He had not been tracking her or following rumors. He was simply a traveler, moving through the territory, and fate, or something that wore fate's face, had put them in the same room. When Clara entered and their eyes met, the shock of recognition moved through her like cold water. Daniel recovered first. "Clara," he said, just her name, but the way he said it, not with surprise, not with pity, but with a steady acknowledgement, as though he was saying, "I see you, and I am not going to pretend this isn't what it is," undid something in her that she had kept carefully knotted for 4 years. She told him enough that evening for him to understand the shape of what had happened. He listened without interrupting. He did not tell her she should forgive Ethan. He did not tell her she should be angry. When she finished, he said only, "You deserve better." She nodded. She had known that for years. But there is a difference between knowing something and having someone bear witness to it. The difference mattered more than she had expected. Daniel had intended to stay one night and move on. Instead, he found work in town the next morning. He never explained why. He didn't need to. He simply appeared at the establishment when something needed fixing, on the street when the wrong kind of guest lingered too long, at the edge of any situation that felt unsafe, and then disappeared back to whatever corner of town he had claimed for himself. He asked for nothing. He made no declarations. He was simply there, steady and quiet, the way a good man is there when the world requires it. Samuel noticed. He said nothing. Some things did not require commentary. Clara noticed too. She held what she felt for Daniel carefully. It was real and it was warm, the first genuinely warm thing she had felt in years. But she did not name it, even to herself. Naming it felt like a door she was not yet ready to open. If this story is moving you, you are not alone. Thousands of people have found their way to this channel looking for exactly this. Stories that don't flinch from the worst of human nature and don't give up on the best of it. If you haven't already, consider subscribing. There is more to come now. Back to Clara. Meanwhile, Ethan's life had become a long punishment. The shame did not arrive all at once. It built, slowly, methodically, the way water cuts through stone. Not violently, just constantly. He would be halfway through a day's work, and something would remind him. The way a woman's voice sounded laughing in another room. The particular amber color of a late afternoon sky. The weight of a coffee cup held in both hands. And the memory would arrive with the precision of a wound that never fully closed. He left Black Creek the morning after the game. He could not stay. He could not look at the saloon or the street in front of it, or the mountains that had been the backdrop of the life he had destroyed. For 5 years he moved across the frontier, working ranches in Montana, driving cattle through Colorado, hunting outlaws in New Mexico, collecting bounties, not because he had any appetite for violence, but because the work was hard enough to exhaust him, and exhaustion was the only thing that quieted the voice in his head. He saved every dollar. Not for himself. He slept in bunkhouses, ate what was provided, wore the same boots until they fell apart. Every cent he didn't need for survival went into a locked box he carried in his saddlebag. He counted it sometimes by firelight, not because he was proud of the amount, but as a kind of penance, a way of measuring the distance between the man he had been and the man he was trying to become. He thought about Clara every day. Not the wanting kind of thinking. He had lost the right to want. He thought about her the way you think about a wrong you cannot undo, with a steady, permanent weight that you learn to carry, not because it gets lighter, but because you get stronger. He hoped she was alive. He hoped she was somewhere safe. He hoped, on his best days, that she had found some version of peace. On his worst days, he lay awake in the dark and felt the full, undiminished weight of what he had done and did not look away. He had earned that sleeplessness. He wore it. Nearly 5 years after the night at the Silver Ace, Ethan finally found Victor Kane in a border town in New Mexico. The confrontation was brutal. Fists, blood, the particular desperation of a man with nothing left to lose fighting a man who had taken everything from him. But Ethan won, and when it was over, Victor, breathing hard on the ground, one eye swollen shut, told him the truth. Clara had been sold, months after the game, to a man named Samuel Graves. Ethan followed the trail across 3 territories. It took 4 more months. He arrived at Samuel Graves' establishment on a cold morning with a saddlebag full of gold and 5 years of guilt and a face that had aged a decade. Samuel welcomed him inside. Ethan placed the gold on the desk without ceremony. "I'll give you every cent I own. Just let me bring my wife home." Samuel looked at the gold for a long moment. He already knew who this man was. Clara had told him everything 5 years ago, on a quiet evening over a cup of tea. He had been waiting for this moment, or something like it, for a long time. He pushed the bag back across the desk. "A wife isn't livestock." Ethan said nothing. "You gambled her away like property." Samuel's voice was quiet. That made it worse. "Did it occur to you, when you placed that wager, that she might have something to say about it?" Each word struck harder than a bullet. Ethan lowered his eyes. "I know," he said. "No," Samuel replied. "You finally understand. That's different." At that moment, the door opened. Clara entered. Behind her stood Daniel. Clara saw Ethan before he saw her. She had a half-second to observe him without being observed, and she used it. He was thinner, older. The easy confidence she had once loved in him was gone, replaced by something quieter. Not weakness, but the particular gravity of a man who has carried something heavy for a long time and knows he will carry it longer still. He looked up. The room became very still. Clara felt the old love move through her, not as warmth, not yet, but as recognition. The way you recognize a place you used to live. The way you know the shape of a door before you open it. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was different from what she remembered. Lower, more careful. "Not for losing the ranch, not for the money." He stopped. "I'm sorry for losing you, for thinking you were something I could wager. You weren't. You never were. And I knew it. I knew it when I made the bet, and I did it anyway. That's the thing I've lived with." Clara stood very still. She had imagined this moment for years. In the first year, she had imagined it as a rescue, him arriving like an answer to a prayer, everything resolved. In the third year, she had imagined it as a confrontation, herself righteous and unmovable. Now standing here, the reality of him, the actual man, in front of her with his hat in his hands, and 5 years carved into his face, was different from any version she had rehearsed. He was not asking to be forgiven. He was not offering the gold as payment. He was simply standing there, telling the truth, making no demands. She turned toward Daniel. Daniel looked back at her steadily. He had made his peace with this moment long before it arrived. He did not telegraph his feelings. He simply held her gaze, calm and certain, and she understood. Whatever she chose, he would not crumble. He was too good for crumbling. Then she looked back at Ethan, two men. One who had loved her quietly for years, from a respectful distance, asking for nothing. One who had loved her badly and spent 5 years trying to understand what that meant. She was quiet for a long time. Then, "I forgive you." Relief moved across Ethan's face like a light coming on. "But forgiveness isn't trust." Her voice was steady. "You lost my trust the night you placed me on that table. Forgiveness I can give you today. Trust is something else. I don't know yet if that's possible, but I'm willing to find out." Ethan nodded. He did not smile. He understood the weight of what she was offering. Not a gift, but a conditional, hard-earned possibility. And he received it with the seriousness it deserved. "That's more than I came here expecting," he said. Months passed. Instead of leaving with Ethan, Clara remained where she was. And Ethan stayed nearby, not because she asked him to, but because he understood that showing up once was not enough. He worked. He was present without being demanding. He never pressured her, never asked for more than she was ready to give, never made his patience feel like a debt she was accumulating. Clara watched him the way she had watched him years ago from the general store window, quietly, carefully, looking for the truth of a person beneath the performance of it. What she found was a man who had been burned down to something real. The easy charm was gone. The desperate need to prove himself was gone. What remained was steadiness. The kind that isn't natural but is earned, forged in years of loneliness and guilt and long nights, counting money by firelight. She began to trust that. Slowly, carefully, the way you trust ice, testing each step before you commit your weight. Daniel watched from a thoughtful distance. He understood what was happening. He had always understood, with the particular clarity of someone who loves a person genuinely, rather than possessively, that Clara's heart was not a territory to be claimed. It was something she offered freely or not at all. One evening, he sat beside her on the porch while Ethan worked inside. "Do you love him?" Daniel asked. Clara was quiet for a moment. "I don't know yet what I feel for him, but I know who he is now, and I think the man he is now is someone worth knowing." Daniel nodded slowly. He had his answer. Then one night, fire swept through the town. Buildings collapsed. People fled. The flames moved fast and without mercy, the way disasters do. When Clara became trapped inside a burning boarding house, the exit blocked by a collapsed beam, smoke dropping toward the floor where she pressed her face to breathe, she thought, strangely, not of Ethan or Daniel, but of the old widow at the general store, and a man tipping his hat, and the moment she had first understood what decency looked like. Ethan came through the door without hesitation. He had heard her voice from the street. That was all it took. He carried her out through the smoke and falling ash, and they were 20 feet from the building when the roof came down behind them with a sound like the end of something. The burns on his hands and arms were severe. He spent the next 3 weeks hovering between fever and consciousness in a room above Samuel's establishment, and Clara rarely left his side. She was not there out of obligation. She knew the difference by now. One evening, near the end of the 3rd week, Ethan opened his eyes and found her there. The room was quiet. Outside the window, the Wyoming sky was doing what it did in the late evening, going amber, then rose, then a deep settled blue. Clara was crying, not the desperate kind, the quiet kind that comes when something you had braced yourself to lose has not after all been lost. Ethan reached for her hand. She took it, not out of obligation, not out of pity, because she loved him. Not the same love she had felt on the porch with the coffee cups and the wordless evenings, but something older and more durable. Love that had been tested by the worst thing he had ever done and had survived. Changed, but not destroyed. When Ethan recovered, they stood together beneath the Wyoming evening. Daniel approached them one final time. There was a sad smile on his face, not bitter, not performative. The genuine expression of a good man accepting something he cannot change. "I spent years," he said quietly, "wishing she'd choose me." He looked at Clara, then at Ethan. "But the truth is," he extended his hand, "she never belonged to either of us. She only ever belonged to herself." Ethan shook it. The two men stood in silence, the particular silence of men who have no quarrel with each other, only a shared understanding of what has passed between them. Then Daniel mounted his horse and rode toward the horizon. Clara watched him disappear. A good man, a noble man, a man who had loved her in silence for years and had never once used that love as a weapon or a claim. She hoped he found happiness. And she believed, in the way you believe things about people whose goodness is obvious without being performed, that he would. Then she turned toward Ethan, the man who had lost everything, the man who had spent 5 years earning back what he once threw away, the man who had walked through a burning building without hesitation because her voice was on the other side of the door. When she took his hand, it was not because he had won her. It was not because he had bought her. It was not because fate forced her or time had simply run out or there was no one else. She chose him, freely, with full knowledge of what he had done and who he had become and what the choosing would require of her. The daily decision to trust a man who had once proven he could not be trusted, and the faith, hard-won and clear-eyed, that the man standing beside her now was not the man who had placed that wager. That was the real gamble, not the one he had made with cards and gold in the Silver Ace Saloon. This one, hers, and under the golden sky of the Wild West, they rode home together. Not rich, not perfect, not without the memory of what had passed between them. But finally, understanding that the greatest fortune a person can possess is not gold and not a second chance. It is the courage to take one. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe in stories that tell the truth about love and failure and the long road back, this channel is built for you. Subscribe, and we will keep telling them.